parked on my lawn like she owned the land. Again, and again, and again. No apology, no permission. Just power wrapped in a red coat and an HOA badge. I asked nicely. Then I warned her. Documented everything. Filed every complaint, followed every rule, and was ignored. Because she wasn't just any neighbor. She was Karen, the queen of the HOA. And in her eyes, that made her untouchable. But then came the storm. The one she didn't see coming. The one I had been waiting for. Because when someone violates your home over and over, you stop talking. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about boundaries, about justice, about how a single dad buried a Lexus under 3 feet of snow legally and exposed the entire rotten core of an HOA's corruption. And trust me, she didn't just lose her car. She lost everything she built her power on. There's a particular kind of silence that blankets a neighborhood like mine. In winter, the kind that lets you hear the crisp crunch of fresh snow under your boots. The faint whistle of wind threading through the bare branches of the maples that line the street, and the distant hum of life tucked safely indoors. That was the peace I had chased when I moved here 5 years ago after my wife's passing. It was just me and my son Dylan piecing together a new version of normal in the wake of a loss that still echoed in quiet moments. Our house sat on a generous corner lot at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac just beyond the city limits in a community governed by the West Haven Ridge Homeowners Association. I'd chosen the place partly for that wide-open front yard, a sweeping expanse of green that I took genuine pride in mowing every Saturday during the warmer months. I never cared much for HOA drama. I paid my dues on time, kept the exterior tidy, and assumed that would be enough to stay off their radar. That all changed the day a silver Lexus SUV rolled straight onto my lawn, as if it belonged there. It was early December. The first hard frost had gripped the ground, turning the grass brittle beneath a thin sheen of ice. I'd just finished driving the last stake into the soil for my holiday light display when I turned and saw its tires sinking slightly into the frozen turf exhaust pipe, puffing lazy clouds of white into the cold air. No note on the windshield, no flashing hazard lights, no sign of an emergency, just parked at a careless diagonal, claiming a chunk of my yard like premium mall parking. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was mechanical trouble, maybe the driver needed help. But then the door swung open and out stepped a woman in a tailored red peacoat, high heels, clicking sharply against the frozen ground, designer handbag slung over one arm while she pressed a phone to her ear. Voice clipped and confident, as if negotiating a high-stakes deal. She glanced at me briefly, as though I were the intruder on her private property. "Good afternoon," I called out, keeping my tone neutral and polite. She offered the barest nod. "Just a quick visit to Maryland's," she said, waving vaguely toward a house farther down the street. "No parking left on the curb. Hope you don't mind." "I do actually," I replied as calmly as I could manage. "This is private property."
"Oh, honey."
She laughed, a dismissive flick of her manicured hand, cutting through the air. "It's all community space around here. No sidewalk means it's not clearly marked, right? Besides, I'm on the board." Those last words landed like a quiet threat wrapped in a credential. Before I could form a response, she was already striding away, heels, stabbing the frost-hardened grass, disappearing into her friend's house without a backward glance. That was the first time Karen parked on my lawn. I didn't know her name yet, but I recognized the type instantly. I'd served with people like her in the Army, the ones who appointed themselves the final authority, who never needed permission because they believed they embodied it. People who had rarely, if ever, been told no, and had no idea how to process a boundary they couldn't simply step over. I let it slide that once. Maybe it was a one-off, I told myself. Maybe the street really had been full. But deep down I knew better. And as the weeks shortened and the air grew sharper, I began to sense that this quiet corner of the world I'd fought so hard to protect was about to be tested in ways I never expected. I wish I could say that first encounter was the last, but it wasn't. Not by a long shot. Over the next few weeks, that silver Lexus became a recurring visitor, appearing on my lawn every few days like an uninvited guest who refused to take the hint. Sometimes it was parked neatly along the edge, as if pretending to respect the boundary. Other times it cut a bold diagonal right through the middle tires, carving shallow grooves into the softening turf whenever the afternoon sun thawed the frost just enough. There were always empty curb spots a few houses down the street I checked every time, but she never used them. She simply pulled onto my yard, killed the engine, and strolled away without a knock, a wave, or even a glance in my direction. I started documenting everything, quietly, methodically. Each incident got a time-stamped photo from multiple angles, one from the porch showing the full vehicle, another close-up of the license plate, a third capturing the tire tracks left behind. I created a folder on my computer labeled Yard Incidents and filed them in chronological order. Old habits from my Army days. When you're dealing with a problem that might escalate, you build evidence early and often. Dylan noticed long before I said anything aloud. One Saturday afternoon, we were out in the driveway, shooting hoops, the ball thumping rhythmically against the cold pavement, our breath fogging in the crisp air. The Lexus rolled up again, slow and deliberate tires crunching over the frozen grass before coming to rest at its usual careless angle. Dylan stopped mid-dribble, the ball rolling to a stop against his sneaker. "Dad, why does that same lady keep parking on our lawn?" I caught the ball on the rebound and held it against my hip, choosing my words carefully. "Because she thinks she's allowed to," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "But she's not." He glanced toward the SUV, then back at me, worry creasing his 10-year-old brow. "Are you going to make her stop?" "I'm working on it, bud," I told him. "One step at a time." He nodded, but I could see the unease lingering in his eyes. Dylan had always been sensitive to tension, especially after the accident that took his mom. A reckless driver running a red light during a rainstorm had shattered our world in an instant, and ever since he'd carried a quiet fear of situations that felt out of control. Confrontation made him shrink. Unfairness made him anxious. The last thing I wanted was for this petty neighborhood nonsense to chip away at the fragile sense of security we'd been rebuilding. The lawn itself began to show the damage. Deep ruts appeared near the corner where she turned in mud, splattering up onto the fenders whenever the ground softened. Even the winter frost couldn't hide the scars. I drove a few bright orange reflector stakes into the soil along the edge one weekend, hoping the visual barrier might finally send a message. The next morning, I woke to the sharp crack of plastic snapping under weight. I looked out the window just in time to see her SUV rolling forward, crushing two of the stakes flat before settling into its familiar spot, crooked, indifferent, triumphant. I stepped outside in my robe and slippers, camera already in hand, and snapped another set of photos. She was climbing out, sunglasses perched on her nose, despite the overcast sky. Morning, I called, keeping my tone civil. She turned slowly as if my presence was an inconvenience. "Yes, you just ran over my stakes. You're tearing up the yard." She glanced at the broken plastic scattered beneath her tires, then shrugged. "It's winter. Grass grows back. And honestly, this corner has always been used as overflow parking. It's practically an easement." "It's not," I said firmly. "It's my deeded property." Her lips curved into a thin, patronizing smile. "Then take it up with the board, sweetheart." She clicked away in those heels again, leaving me standing in the cold with steam rising from my coffee mug and a slow burn building in my chest. I wanted to shout after her. I wanted to block her path, demand respect, unload every ounce of frustration that had been piling up since the first intrusion. But I didn't. Years in the military had taught me that anger without strategy is just noise. So I breathed, went back inside, and added the new photos to the folder. That night, after Dylan was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and drafted my first formal email to the HOA. Polite, factual, professional. I attached the photos, included dates and times, and even linked to the county property records showing the exact boundary lines. I hit send and waited. The response came 2 days later, a generic boilerplate reply about community flexibility during high visitation periods and ongoing review of shared access interpretations. No acknowledgement of the photos, no promise of action, just vague language designed to deflect. I followed up twice. Silence. But the intrusions didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder, as if my complaints had only confirmed to her that she could act with impunity. And with every fresh set of tire tracks scarring my lawn, the quiet resolve inside me hardened a little more. This wasn't just about grass anymore. It was about a boundary being tested again and again by someone who believed rules were for other people. And I had decided somewhere in those cold December nights that I wasn't going to be the one who blinked first. I knew I couldn't keep letting it slide forever. Ignoring the problem only encouraged it, and I wasn't about to teach my son that boundaries were optional depending on who was crossing them. So I decided to take the next formal step. I would attend an HOA meeting and raise the issue in person. The meetings were held the second Tuesday of every month in the community clubhouse, a low brick building with fluorescent lights and folding chairs arranged in neat rows. I'd never gone before. I'd always figured staying invisible was the safest policy. But this time I dressed in a clean button-down, arrived early, and took a seat near the back, arms crossed, face neutral. Karen chaired the meeting like a queen on a throne. She wore a sharp red blazer that matched her usual authoritative energy, and she gripped a printed agenda as if it were a gavel. The two board members flanking her nodded along to nearly everything she said, rarely offering more than a murmured second or an approving hum. She spoke in clipped, loud sentences, correcting residents for speaking out of turn, dismissing complaints with practiced smiles that never reached her eyes. And referring to herself in the third person more than once, Karen has reviewed this matter thoroughly. Karen believes we must uphold our standards, and my personal favorite, Karen, will speak for the board on this. I sat quietly observing, letting the room's resigned atmosphere sink in. Most attendees looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, tired homeowners hoping to leave, with fewer problems than they'd arrived with. You could feel the collective exhaustion, the sense that raising your voice only invited deflection or retaliation. When the floor opened for resident comments, I stood. Good evening. I began, keeping my voice steady. My name is Sam Brooks. I live at 41 Ridgeview Court. I'm here about a repeated trespass issue on my private property. Karen's pen stopped moving across her notes. She looked up slowly, recognition flickering behind her polite mask. Is this regarding lawn maintenance citations? She asked, already steering the conversation. No, I replied. It's regarding a vehicle, a silver Lexus SUV that has parked on my front yard at least 9 times in the past month without permission. I've emailed the board twice with time-stamped photos, dates, and county records confirming my property lines. I've received no response. The room shifted, a few heads turned. The air grew noticeably thicker. Karen's smile tightened, but it held. I do recall those emails, she said smoothly. They were reviewed and appropriately filed. There is no recorded violation because the area in question falls within an interpretable community easement for brief, informal use. That's incorrect, I said, still calm. The county assessor's plat map shows the entire lawn as part of my deeded lot. No easement, no common area designation. She leaned forward slightly. If you have a formal grievance, Mr. Brooks, you're welcome to submit an appeal through the proper channels. I did, I answered. Twice. No acknowledgement, no reply. A low murmur rippled through the rows. Someone in the back let out a soft, involuntary scoff. Karen's eyes snapped toward the sound like a hawk spotting movement, but she quickly recovered, shuffling her papers. This is not the appropriate forum for individual disputes, she declared, banging her small wooden gavel once. Please resubmit your concern in writing and the board will address it in due course. I already have, I said, sitting down, twice. She didn't respond. She simply moved briskly to the next agenda item, her voice rising just enough to drown out any lingering tension. Walking home that night, in the biting cold, Dylan's small gloved hand tucked into mine, I felt something shift inside me, not rage, but a cold, clear focus I remembered from my military days. The stillness before a calculated move. Not drama, not theatrics, just planning. Karen had leverage position and years of practiced intimidation on her side. But I had evidence patience, and as I discovered that very evening, the HOA's own bylaws working in my favor. Back home with Dylan asleep upstairs, I downloaded the full set of governing documents from the community portal. I read them cover to cover under the glow of my desk lamp, highlighter in hand, coffee going cold beside me. And there it was buried, in the fine print of Section 8.3.2, abandonment of personal property on private grounds. Any vehicle left on private property without the express consent of the owner for a continuous period exceeding 12 hours may be considered trespassing and subject to removal at the vehicle owner's expense. This provision applies exclusively to deeded private lots, not shared streets or common areas. Clear, unambiguous, on my land. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the highlighted paragraph until the words blurred. The snow was coming, heavier storms were in the forecast, And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt the faintest edge of advantage tilt in my direction. Karen had no idea what was about to fall on her. The discovery of that bylaw clause felt like finding a loaded weapon in a drawer you didn't know you owned, legal clean and perfectly suited to the fight at hand. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger yet. I still believed in doing things the right way, in exhausting every reasonable avenue before the weather did the rest. So I went one step further down the official path. One afternoon, after dropping Dylan at school, I sat at my desk with the county plat map spread out beside me, the stack of printed photos neatly paper-clipped and the highlighted bylaws page on top. I wrote a formal, certified letter, not an email this time, but an honest-to-God letter notarized at the bank, complete with tracking and return receipt requested. I enclosed color copies of everything: the property survey, the incident photos, the bylaw section. I mailed it to the HOA's registered office address, and for good measure scanned and emailed the whole package to every board member whose address I could find. 2 days later, the reply arrived, this time signed by Connor Wiseman, the HOA's retained attorney. Dear Mr. Brooks, we acknowledge receipt of your correspondence. After careful review of the submitted materials, the board has determined that no enforceable violation has occurred. While the lawn area is indeed deeded to your lot, it falls within the association's aesthetic oversight zone, granting the board discretionary authority over its functional use. Any unilateral action on your part to restrict access may itself constitute a breach of community standards. Regards, Connor Wiseman, Esquire. I read it 3 times, feeling the words twist like a knife. Aesthetic oversight zone wasn't even a real legal term. It was smoke, a made-up phrase designed to blur ownership into perpetual HOA control. They weren't denying the land was mine. They were simply claiming the right to dictate what I could do with it anyway. It was clever intimidation dressed up as legalese. I picked up the phone and called Marcus, an old Army buddy, who now worked in the county planning office. Tell me if this makes sense, I said, reading him the paragraph. Marcus laughed, the short, incredulous bark of someone who'd seen every bureaucratic trick in the book. Sam, that's pure fiction. Oversight of aesthetics means they can fine you for painting your house purple. It does not mean they own functional rights to your yard. If the deed says it's yours and you pay taxes on it, it's yours. End of story. That confirmation settled something in me. The next weekend, I drove to the hardware store and bought a dozen heavy-duty metal stakes and bright red laminated signs that read private property. No trespassing violators will be prosecuted. I spent Saturday morning pounding them into the frozen ground every 3 feet along the exact spot where Karen liked to turn in. I angled the signs outward so no driver could possibly claim they hadn't seen them. Dylan helped with the last few, hammering the stakes deeper with a rubber mallet, his cheeks pink from the cold. Are these gonna work? He asked, breath fogging. They'll work better than nothing, I said. And if they don't, we've got the cameras now. I'd quietly installed a motion-triggered trail camera on the front porch and a forward-facing dash cam in my truck, both with clear views of the lawn. Every angle, covered every second, recorded. For 4 blissful days, the lawn stayed empty. No silver Lexus, no crushed stakes. I let myself hope the message had finally landed. Then Thursday arrived. A light snow had begun around noon, soft fat flakes drifting lazily down, the kind that sticks just enough to dust the world in white. The forecast had worsened overnight, 8 to 12 inches by morning, heavy and wet, with winds picking up after dark. The first real storm of the season. At 4:42 p.m., I glanced out the kitchen window and felt my stomach drop. There she was. The Lexus nosed onto my yard like the signs were invisible. Tires crunched over 2 of the new stakes, bending one, snapping another clean in half, before settling into the familiar crooked position, half on the grass, half blocking the corner. I opened the front door and stepped out into the swirling flakes. Hey, I called across the lawn. She looked up from her phone, irritation flashing across her face. You just destroyed my signs. She glanced at the broken stakes under her tires, then back at me. They're temporary fixtures. The board hasn't approved them. The board doesn't get to approve signs on my private property, I said. She rolled her eyes. Whatever helps you feel in control. I'll only be an hour. No, I replied, voice steady. You won't be. Not this time. She smirked, then called the police. They'll tell you it's a civil dispute, not worth their time. She slammed the door, locked the SUV with a beep, and crunched away through the fresh snow heels, leaving sharp little holes that filled almost instantly with new flakes. I stood there watching her disappear down the street, snow collecting on my shoulders, the wind picking up and whipping flakes against my face. I didn't call the police. I went back inside, closed the door, and looked at the clock, 4:47 p.m. The storm was intensifying. Visibility already dropping. Roads would glaze over soon. And according to the bylaws she loved to quote so selectively, 12 hours was the line. I poured myself a fresh coffee, sat by the window, and waited for nature to do what paperwork and politeness had failed to. The snow kept falling thicker, heavier, relentless. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to calm. At exactly 5:00 a.m., the next morning, 12 hours, and 13 minutes after Karen had walked away from her abandoned SUV, I was already up, layered in thermals, heavy boots, laced tight gloves flexed against the biting cold. The storm had lived up to every promise. Over a foot of wet, heavy snow had fallen overnight, wind-driven drifts piling even higher in places. The world outside was muffled, pristine, and utterly silent except for the low hum of my snowblower warming up in the garage. The trail camera's indicator light blinked steady green. It had captured everything: her arrival, the crushed stakes, her casual departure, into the swirling flakes, and every undisturbed hour since. I stepped onto the porch. The silver Lexus was still there, half swallowed by the storm, its roof and hood blanketed in a thick white shroud. Only the side mirrors and a hint of the windshield wipers protruded like frozen antennae. The snow had drifted higher on the driver's side, sculpting a smooth, seamless mound that looked almost intentional, nature's own camouflage. I pulled the starter cord once, twice. The snowblower roared to life. I guided it down the steps, positioned the chute toward the public sidewalk, and began clearing my driveway in long, deliberate passes. Forward, reverse, adjust the angle, forward again. Each sweep sent a powerful arc of snow sailing through the air. I worked methodically, the way I'd once cleared landing zones in Afghanistan. No wasted motion, no hurry, just steady progress. With every pass, I edged closer to the buried vehicle, clearing the area around it without ever touching the car itself. The snow that had fallen on my property stayed on my property, only now it was redistributed into a perfect towering drift that enveloped the Lexus completely. By the time I finished, the SUV had vanished beneath a flawless white hill, indistinguishable from the natural drifts the plows had left along the curb. If you didn't know it was there, you'd never guess a luxury vehicle lay entombed beneath. I shut off the engine. The sudden silence felt profound, almost reverent. I stood back and surveyed the result. No anger surged through me. No triumphant rush. Just a deep, steady clarity, the same calm I used to feel after completing a mission exactly as planned. Karen had chosen to leave her car on my private land for longer than the bylaws allowed. I had simply cleared my yard of accumulated snow. Nature time and the rules she enforced on everyone else had done the rest. I snapped a final set of time-stamped photos, one wide shot of the seamless drift, one close-up of the faint outline, where the roofline used to be, and one of my boot print beside the mound for scale. Then I went inside, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and watched the storm's final flurries taper off into pale morning light. Dylan padded downstairs around 8, rubbing sleep from his eyes, hair sticking up in every direction. "Whoa," he whispered, pressing his face to the window. "It's gone." "Buried," I corrected gently, "but still there." He turned to me, a mix of awe and worry on his face. "Is she gonna be really mad?" "Probably," I said, handing him a mug of hot chocolate. But mad doesn't change facts. He nodded slowly, cradling the warm mug in both hands, staring out at the innocent-looking drift. By noon, the storm had moved on, leaving a brilliant cloudless sky and a neighborhood buried under glittering white. Schools were closed, roads barely plowed. The whole world paused under winter's heavy hand. Dylan and I bundled up and went out to shovel the walkway together, a father-son ritual we'd kept since he was small. We were nearly finished when Dylan wandered toward the side yard, curious about the massive mound. The wind had sculpted it even smoother overnight, erasing any hint of the vehicle beneath. He took a few steps across the lawn, testing the crusty surface, when his boot suddenly punched through a hidden rut, one of the deep tire grooves Karen's repeated parking had carved into the ground weeks earlier. The snow had concealed it perfectly, turning it into a treacherous dip. His leg buckled, He yelped and went down hard, landing on his outstretched arm. Dylan. I dropped the shovel and sprinted over, heart slamming against my ribs. He was curled on his side, clutching his right wrist, face pale against the snow. "It hurts," he gasped, tears welling fast. I scooped him up carefully and carried him inside, settling him on the couch with pillows and an ice pack. It wasn't broken, just a nasty sprain, but seeing him in pain twisted something fierce inside me. Those ruts were her doing. Every single one. And now they'd hurt the person I loved most. As he dozed under the influence of children's ibuprofen, I sat beside him and stared out at the buried Lexus. The calm I'd felt earlier hardened into something colder, more resolute. This wasn't just about my lawn anymore. It was about the quiet, cumulative harm one person's arrogance could cause and how far I was willing to go to make it stop. The snow had spoken once, and it wasn't finished yet. The sprained wrist changed everything. It turned an abstract principle into something painfully real. A small boy wincing every time he tried to grip his fork at dinner, his eyes filling with frustrated tears when he couldn't even tie his own shoes. Every time I looked at the ice pack pressed to his skin, I saw those hidden ruts beneath the snow in a new light. Not just damage to grass, but hazards created by one person's repeated disregard. While Dylan napped on the couch, I opened the digital archive I'd been building since October. I added the new photos of the engulfed Lexus, the time-stamped snow depth measurements, and a short video clip of the exact spot where Dylan had fallen. Then I created a shared cloud folder titled West Haven Ridge HOA Issues and sent invite links to 3 neighbors I trusted, people who had nodded sympathetically at meetings or muttered complaints under their breath. Ms. Jenkins replied within minutes. "Sam, thank you. I've got my own stack of nonsense from her. Adding photos now." By evening, 5 more neighbors had joined. Someone uploaded screenshots of selective landscaping finds. Another shared a recording of Karen berating a teenager for chalk art on the sidewalk. A third posted old emails where parking complaints about Karen herself had been ignored for years. The folder grew like a quiet rebellion, evidence piling up the way snow had piled over the Lexus. The next morning, the sun broke through, turning the neighborhood into a glittering expanse. I was out early clearing the walkway again when I heard the sharp crunch of boots on crusty snow and an unmistakable voice slicing through the cold. "Oh my God, what the hell is this?" Karen stood at the edge of my driveway in a fur-lined parka, cheeks flushed red from wind and fury, eyes wide as she stared at the seamless white mound where her SUV had vanished. Mascara had already begun to streak from the sting of cold air hitting sudden tears. She marched forward, slipped once on an icy patch, caught herself, and kept coming. "You buried my car!" she shrieked, voice cracking. "You absolute psychopath!" I turned off the snowblower and faced her calmly. "You left your vehicle on my private property for over 12 hours. I cleared snow from my yard. That's all. That's destruction of property, vandalism." "No," I said. "It's natural accumulation on land you had no right to occupy. I have continuous footage, weather reports, and the HOA bylaws to prove it." She sputtered, breath coming in angry clouds. "I'm calling the board. I'm calling the police. You're going to pay for this." "Go ahead," I replied. "They'll see the same evidence I do. Starting with the 9 prior incidents you never acknowledged." Her hands balled into fists at her sides. "You think this is funny? You think you've won some little game? I think I've enforced a boundary you kept ignoring," I said. "And I think you're realizing the rules apply to you too." For a moment, she looked as if she might charge at the mound and start digging with her bare hands. Then her gaze flicked past me toward the neighboring windows where curtains twitched toward porch lights that had flicked on despite the bright daylight. People were watching. No one was rushing out to defend her. That seemed to hit harder than anything I'd said. "You're going to regret this," she hissed, voice lower now, trembling with something beyond anger. "Funny," I said quietly. "That's exactly what I thought every time you drove over my lawn." She turned sharply, nearly slipped again, and stormed back down the street, boots slamming into the snow with each furious step. She disappeared around the corner without looking back. I stood there a long moment, listening to the wind whistle through bare branches, feeling the cold seep through my gloves. There was no satisfaction in watching her rage, only a grim recognition that the mask had finally slipped. Inside, Dylan was awake, sitting up on the couch with his arm in a makeshift sling I'd fashioned from an old scarf. "Was that the lady?" he asked. "Yeah. She sounded really mad." "She is," I said, sitting beside him. But anger doesn't rewrite facts. He leaned his head against my shoulder. Are we okay? I wrapped my good arm around him carefully. We're more than okay, bud. We're standing our ground. Outside the mound sat undisturbed, gleaming innocently under the sun. The forecast on my phone showed another major storm rolling in within days, 20 inches or more, with high winds and ice. The Lexus was still there, submerged deeper now as melting crust refroze overnight. And somewhere down the street, Karen was discovering that power built on intimidation doesn't survive when people stop being afraid. The snow had only just begun to speak. The second blizzard hit like a verdict from the sky. It barreled in 2 nights later, fiercer than the first winds, howling through the eaves, snow driving sideways in thick, blinding sheets. Power flickered once, twice, then held. The forecast had warned of 20-plus inches ice layering between bands of snow, the kind of storm that erases roads and turns familiar streets into white voids. I prepared the way I always did, snowblower fueled and ready in the garage. Extra batteries charged for the trail cams, bottled water, and canned goods stocked just in case. Dylan, his wrist still wrapped in a soft brace, helped me tape the windows against drafts and set out flashlights like sentries on the kitchen counter. We turned it into a game storm prep mission, and for a few hours, he forgot the ache in his arm and laughed as we raced to finish before the first heavy flakes fell. By midnight, the world outside had vanished. Only the glow of the porch light revealed the relentless curtain of white. The mound over Karen's Lexus grew higher, smoother, more absolute, wind-sculpted into a perfect dome that now stood nearly 4 feet tall. The car wasn't just buried, it was erased. The storm raged for 36 straight hours. When it finally spent itself, the neighborhood lay under a heavy, breathless hush. Drifts pressed against doors. Mailboxes disappeared. The buried SUV had become indistinguishable from the landscape, a gentle hillock at the corner of my lawn, innocent and permanent looking. But the HOA wasn't ready to let it rest. Thursday morning, as pale sunlight filtered through thinning clouds, a knock rattled the front door. I opened it to find 2 men on the porch, one in a wool coat with an HOA lanyard, swinging at his chest, the other in a maintenance jacket, clutching a snow shovel like a reluctant weapon. Mr. Brooks, the coated man began, voice stiff against the cold. The board has authorized recovery of a resident's vehicle, currently obstructed on your property. I leaned against the doorframe. You mean Karen Ellison's Lexus? He cleared his throat. I'm not at liberty to specify, but yes. We have permission to clear the snow and facilitate towing. Do you have written authorization from the vehicle owner, I asked? And from me, the property owner whose land you'd be entering. He hesitated. The maintenance worker shifted his weight eyes on the ground. The board maintains jurisdiction over common areas, I finished for him. Not my deeded lawn. That vehicle has been trespassing for 8 days now. Local code calls anything over 72 hours an actionable encroachment. So unless you've got a court order or Karen herself standing here ready to sign a trespass waiver, you're not setting foot past that sidewalk. Wind gusted, swirling loose snow around their boots. The coated man swallowed hard. We'll consult further, he muttered. You do that, I said, and closed the door. I watched from the window as they retreated to a waiting HOA truck, heads down against the wind. They didn't even glance back at the mound. That evening, as Dylan and I ate soup by candlelight in case the power dipped again, my phone buzzed with a text from Ms. Jenkins. They're coming tomorrow. Karen's bringing a tow truck herself. Clipboard and all. I smiled faintly. Let them come. Friday dawned sharp and bright. At around 4 o'clock, I heard the rumble of a heavy engine and stepped onto the porch. There she was, Karen in full battle regalia, fur-lined parka zipped to her chin. Tall snow boots, clipboard clutched like a shield. Flanking her were the same 2 board members from the meetings, looking distinctly uncomfortable, and a burly tow truck driver in a knit cap surveying the scene with professional skepticism. They gathered at the edge of my property line, staring at the massive drift. No one crossed onto the lawn. I walked out slowly, hands in my pockets, stopping at the end of my cleared driveway. Afternoon, I called. Karen whipped around. We're here to recover my vehicle. Your stunt has created a dangerous hazard. Dangerous how, I asked. Your abandoned car has been sitting on my private property for over a week. I've simply allowed natural snowfall to accumulate. You intentionally submerged it, she snapped. I cleared my driveway and sidewalk, I corrected. Multiple times. Footage shows I never touched your car. Care for a time-stamped copy? The skinny board member with glasses cleared his throat nervously. Sam, maybe we can all just... I'm done with maybe, I said. I've documented every incident, every ignored complaint, every bylaw you've twisted. This ends when the trespass ends. Karen took one aggressive step forward, boot landing just inside my lawn. You think you're above the rules because you hide behind technicalities? No, I replied evenly. I'm following the rules you wrote, thoroughly. The tow driver finally spoke up, scratching his head. Lady, I gotta be honest, I can't even see the vehicle. I need clear access and confirmation. It's safe to dig. Without the property owner's okay, I'm not risking equipment or liability. Karen's face flushed crimson. Just start shoveling. He looked at me. Sir, you authorizing this? Not without a signed waiver assuming all trespass liability, I said. Or a sheriff's escort with a court order. The driver shrugged. Then I'm out. Sorry, ma'am. Karen stood frozen breath coming in sharp bursts. For the first time, the board members wouldn't meet her eyes. Fine, she snarled. We'll go legal. Full legal. She spun on her heel, nearly slipping on the ice, and stormed back to the truck. The others trailed behind like chastened children. I watched them drive away, the tow truck rumbling off empty. That night, as Dylan slept soundly for the first time in days, I updated the archive one more time, new photos, new timestamps. A short video clip of the failed recovery attempt. The walls around Karen's authority weren't just cracking. They were collapsing under their own weight. And the winter still had plenty of snow left to fall. The morning after the failed tow truck spectacle, something in the neighborhood felt different, lighter, as if the air itself had exhaled. Curtains that used to stay tightly drawn now twitched openly when I walked past. Neighbors I'd only ever nodded to in passing suddenly slowed their dogs or paused their shoveling to offer a quiet word of encouragement. One older gentleman 2 doors down left a foil-covered pan of homemade chili on my porch with a simple note, for you and the boy. You're doing what the rest of us should have done years ago. It wasn't hero worship. It was recognition. The kind that comes when someone finally says out loud what everyone else has been thinking. That afternoon, while Dylan napped with his wrist elevated, there was another knock, softer this time. I opened the door to find Gloria Sims, the HOA treasurer, standing alone on the porch. She looked exhausted, eyes puffy, no makeup, coat zipped high as if she were trying to disappear inside it. May I come in for a minute? She asked, voice barely above the wind. I stepped aside. She entered hesitantly, declining coffee, but accepting a chair at the kitchen table. For a long moment, she just stared at her gloved hands. I owe you an apology, Sam, she said finally. We all do. I waited. She took a shaky breath. Karen's been difficult for years. We knew it. She intimidates without ever raising her voice, just that smile, those clipped emails, the constant reminders of standards. People stayed quiet because it was easier. No one wanted to be the next target. But you let it continue, I said, not accusing, just stating the fact. Yes, she whispered. And now it's blown up in all our faces. The board held an emergency meeting last night. Without her. We didn't tell her. We needed to speak freely for once. I raised an eyebrow. And we're moving to suspend her pending a full review. Complaints are pouring in, not just from you. Years of stuff people have sat on. Selective fines, threats, favoritism. The shared folder you started, half the neighborhood has seen it now. She slid a folded sheet across the table, printouts of internal HOA emails from the last 72 hours. Board members arguing, citing specific incidents, admitting how far things had gone. We're calling for a removal vote, she continued, and we're auditing the books while we're at it. Karen's had sole signature authority on too many line items. I scanned the emails. One from a longtime board member read, I can no longer defend behavior that has alienated so many residents. We must act decisively. Gloria met my eyes. You didn't just protect your lawn, Sam. You gave the rest of us permission to stop being afraid. She stood to leave, pausing at the door. You played by every rule and still won. That terrifies people like her. And it's inspiring the rest of us. After she left, I stood on the porch a long time watching meltwater drip from the icicles overhead. The mound over the Lexus glistened in the weak afternoon sun, beginning to sag slightly at the edges as temperatures climbed above freezing for the first time in weeks. 2 days later, Officer Raines, the deputy I'd met at neighborhood watch meetings, pulled up in a marked sheriff's SUV. Former Marine steady guy. He climbed the steps with a notepad, but no urgency in his posture. Afternoon, Sam. Mind if we talk inside? We sat at the same kitchen table. Dylan peeked from the living room couch, curious but unafraid. Got a formal complaint, Rains said. Allegations of intentional vehicle burial property damage, harassment. Karen Ellison, I said. He gave a small nod. I need to ask a few questions for the report. I slid the thick tabbed folder across to him, every photo timestamp email, bylaw, highlight, weather log, trail cam stills. Even the medical note from Dylan's urgent care visit for the sprain. He flipped through it slowly, eyebrows rising. This is thorough. 2 cameras running continuously, I said. I never touched her vehicle. Just cleared my own property multiple times during documented storms. He lingered on the photos of the crushed stakes, the tire ruts, Dylan's wrapped wrist. Between you and me, he said quietly, we've fielded complaints about Mrs. Ellison for years. Nothing ever stuck because no one wanted to go on record. You've got records. He closed the folder. I don't see a criminal case here. Civil at worst, and even that's thin. I'll take this copy for the file. Makes my paperwork easy. At the door, he paused. You did this clean, Sam. That matters. After he drove away, I felt the knot that had lived in my chest for months finally loosen. The neighbors knew. The authorities knew. The evidence was irrefutable. And Karen's carefully constructed empire built on fear, favoritism, and selective rules was crumbling faster than the snow on her sunken Lexus. Spring was still months away, but for the first time I could almost feel it coming. The unraveling accelerated like melting snow rushing toward a storm drain. By the end of that week, the HOA's online portal had changed overnight. Karen's smug headshot and self-written bio, the one that boasted about her dedicated leadership and unwavering commitment to community excellence, were gone. In their place, a plain banner read, Interim Leadership in Transition, thank you for your patience and understanding. A new email blast went out on Sunday morning, carefully neutral in tone, but unmistakable in intent. A special meeting would be held to review leadership performance and governance practices with open resident feedback encouraged and a potential vote on board restructuring. Karen didn't attend. No one expected her to. Word spread quietly, but steadily. The shared folder had grown into a full archive, dozens of contributors now, years of grievances, finally seeing daylight. Someone unearthed old meeting minutes showing Karen overriding votes on landscaping contracts that benefited a company owned by her brother-in-law. Another resident posted photos of her own Lexus parked illegally on other lawns, years earlier complaints dismissed with a single line. Matter resolved internally. The tide hadn't just turned. It had become a wave. Monday morning brought the final extraction. I watched from the porch, coffee steaming in my hands, as a professional towing crew arrived, not the local guy from before, but a company hired directly by Karen's insurance. 2 workers in heavy coveralls methodically exposed the vehicle like archaeologists, unearthing a relic, plastic shovels, heat blankets, a small steam generator to loosen the ice crust. They worked in silence, nodding politely when our eyes met, but offering no conversation. When the silver Lexus finally emerged, it looked strangely diminished, coated in frost, doors frozen shut, at first tires flattened slightly from the weight of weeks under snow. They winched it onto the flatbed, with mechanical efficiency chains clanking against the undercarriage. As they drove away, the spot where it had rested was nothing more than a shallow, icy crater ringed by dead grass. I stared at that hollow for a long time. It felt like the end of an era. That same afternoon, while Dylan and I were raking away the last gritty remnants of road salt from the driveway, a small white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No stamp, no address, just my name written in tight, careful script. I opened it inside, away from the wind, a single sheet of heavy stationery folded once. I was wrong. I let it get personal. I never thought anyone would stand up long enough to make me lose. I don't expect forgiveness, but you deserve to know you were right. K. I read it 3 times, feeling the weight of each word. There was no dramatic apology, no plea for reconciliation, just a stark admission from someone who had probably never written one before. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumph. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the storm had done its work not only on a car, but on a person. I tucked the note into the back of the master evidence folder, the one that now held everything from the first time-stamped photo to the sheriff's report to Gloria's email chain. It belonged there among the records. Not as vindication, but as closure. That evening, Marcus called with the news I'd been waiting for. Public records just updated, he said, excitement in his voice. The HOA filed an internal resolution. Karen Ellison is officially suspended from all board duties pending a full membership review. They've frozen her access to the portal, the bank accounts, everything. Gloria's acting chair until the special election next month. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Dylan build a Lego fortress on the living room floor, his wrist finally free of the brace movements, careful but confident again. Open ballots, I asked. Fully transparent, Marcus confirmed. And they're waiving the usual proxy rules so more people can vote in person. You cracked the dam, man. Now the water's flowing. After I hung up, I stepped outside. The air had warmed noticeably. The relentless drip of melting icicles filled the evening like a gentle percussion. The crater in the lawn was already softening at the edges, promising new growth beneath the damage. Karen's house was quiet, curtains drawn, no movement. I caught a glimpse of her once that week, walking her small schnauzer on a short leash, head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. She looked smaller somehow, as if the space she used to occupy with sheer force of will had contracted around her. The neighborhood didn't celebrate openly. There were no banners or parties. But meetings filled up again. People spoke without glancing nervously at the chair. Questions were answered directly. And when the special election results came in April, Gloria won the permanent chair position by a landslide, running on a platform of simple fairness. Karen didn't run. She didn't even show up to vote. The power she had wielded for years hadn't been taken from her by force. It had simply evaporated unnoticed, at first, then all at once, the moment people realized they no longer had to fear it. And in the softening ground where her Lexus had once been submerged, tiny green shoots began to push through the thawed earth. Life insistent and quiet, reclaiming its space. Spring arrived that year not with a roar, but with a whisper, the slow, insistent kind that makes you notice every small victory. Patches of emerald grass pushed through the thawed soil where the crater had been. Robins returned, hopping across the lawn in search of worms softened by April rains. Icicles surrendered one by one, their steady drip, 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 composing a quiet symphony of renewal from the eaves. I noticed it all more keenly than ever before. After months of winter's sharp edges, the softening world felt like a reward earned the hard way. One warm Saturday in May, I stood in the front yard, with a rake and a bag of fresh seed, working the scarred corner where the Lexus had rested for so long. The dead patches were stubborn, but I turned the soil, gently mixed in compost, and spread the new grass seed like scattering hope. Dylan joined me, his wrist fully healed now, kneeling to press the seeds into the earth with careful pats of his small hands. Think it'll grow back thicker? He asked, squinting up at the sun. Always does, I said. Good soil remembers how to heal. He grinned, dirt smudged across his cheek, and went back to work. In that moment, watching him move freely again, laughing unafraid, I felt the full weight of what we'd protected, not just a lawn, a sense of safety. The barbecue that afternoon wasn't planned as a celebration. It started simply. The grill still worked after its winter hibernation, the weather was perfect, and Dylan asked if we could invite just a couple people. But word spread the old-fashioned way, texts, porch conversations, kids running between houses. And by 3 o'clock, the yard filled with neighbors carrying lawn chairs, coolers, and covered dishes. Miguel brought burgers and his booming firefighter laugh. Ms. Jenkins arrived with her famous potato salad and stories that had everyone roaring. Gloria came too relaxed in jeans, instead of board meeting attire, staying until the sun dipped low, and the fireflies began their evening dance. We ate, talked, let the kids run wild with frisbees and sidewalk chalk. Someone cranked up classic rock from a portable speaker. Laughter rose and fell like waves. No one mentioned Karen directly. There was no need. Her absence was its own quiet statement. As the coals glowed orange in the fading light, Dylan tugged my sleeve and pointed toward the reseated corner. We should name it, he said, eyes bright. Make it official. I chuckled. Got a suggestion. He thought hard, tongue poking the corner of his mouth the way it always did when he concentrated. Mount Respect, he declared finally. Not Mount Revenge, I teased. He shook his head seriously. Nah, revenge is loud and gone quick. Respect sticks around. I ruffled his hair, too full of something wordless to reply right away. Later, after the last guest left and the chairs were stacked against the garage, I sat alone on the porch steps with a final beer, watching the sky shift from pink to indigo. The neighborhood settled into its familiar evening hush, crickets starting their chorus, a distant dog barking, once the faint scent of charcoal lingering in the air. I thought about the arc of it all. How it began with one careless set of tire tracks and grew into something that reshaped an entire community. How patience evidence and a couple of fierce snowstorms had accomplished what years of complaints never could. Karen still lived 2 houses down. I saw her occasionally walking the Schnauzer at dawn, head lowered, route carefully planned to avoid passing directly in front of our place. She never waved. I never expected her to. Some wounds take longer to scar over than others. But the fear was gone. The arbitrary citations stopped. Meetings ran on time and ended with actual solutions. And when new families moved in, they were greeted with block party invitations instead of rulebooks. Dylan appeared in the doorway behind me, blanket around his shoulders despite the mild night. "Can't sleep?" I asked. "Too much fun," he said, settling beside me on the step. We sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies blink across the darkened lawn. Daddy said after a while, "You think she'll ever say sorry out loud?" I considered it. Maybe, maybe not. But she knows now. That's enough. He nodded, leaning against my arm. Mount Respect's gonna have the best grass on the street. I smiled into the dark. It already does. The lesson wasn't in the snow that had fallen, or even in the car it had engulfed. It was in what grew afterward, stronger, greener, rooted deeper, because it had weathered the weight. Boundaries patiently defended don't just protect space. They make room for everything that matters to thrive. And on quiet nights like this with my son beside me, and the world finally truly at peace, I knew we'd earned every inch of it.